with this exercise, with the push from the Canadian government, from business, member states, etc., we have, I would say, an unprecedented support by the provinces vis-a-vis this type of an agreement. So it's an unprecedented, let's say, time in which we can see if we can get something going. I should say, if we look at only in areas of trade and goods, EU-Canada trade isn't that great. But if you start looking at areas like services and investment, it's a growing area and it's much more significant in the overall economic relationship. And those are areas in which the provinces have a major role. In investment, you have a decision to invest in a certain part of Canada. You also have to deal with the provincial authorities in that part of Canada. Services, there's certain services, professions, for instance. If we talk about the mobility of professions, that's all provincial, basically. Self-governing professions, the lawyer profession, for instance, or accountancy. I'm not sure, maybe not accountancy is right, but a lot of it is on the provincial area. So we need to get the provincial buy-in to get an agreement that's really of interest. One other thing is we have to look basically, and one is a very bureaucratic reason, resources. There's only so many trade negotiators in the Commission, so many good trade negotiators in the Commission, and you just can't have them doing 20 or 30 different negotiations. And so one has to set priorities, and that's a bureaucratic answer, but that's one of the reasons why we probably haven't gone with Japan. There are people with Korea, there's the WTO, although it's in a bit of advance, but the discussions are going on. India, ASEAN, you've seen from Professor Woolcock's all the various negotiations. That brings in a lot of people. And if you're talking about a comprehensive area, a large scope, that brings in even more people and brings in people from other services. And you just need to coordinate them. So there is a problem just of getting enough good people to be able to focus on them as well.
Just very short on the kind of pressure. I mean, when you look at the setup of European governments, I would say half of them are run by social democrats, socialists, the other half by conservative liberals, and the driving forces like on the negotiations, UK, Labour Party, Germany, Social Democratic Conservative Coalition, Holland, the same. It doesn't really matter, and also Canada is not seen, is not seen as a country. We are on the same, as Jason said, on the same developed stage. This is not a threat in a sense that it involves a big public discussion. In the European Parliament, I would say that will be approved by a wide margin from most political stripes. I mean, I'm speculating now. I could imagine that when we do something with India, that might be a bigger discussion, because there it's cheap labor, low wage costs, but not with Canada.
As long as the seals are sorted out.
It represents a plurality of interests as well. Like, part of the problem that we have right now, speaking as a Canadian, is that if you go and try and negotiate with the United States to refine NAFTA and improve it, they'll look at you and go, well, what other options do you have? It's sort of our way or the highway. And with the European Union, not only does that offset the reliance on the United States, but in the European Union, Canada can almost behave like a member state. And you can pick your political allegiances, and they shift. And whereas we may not have had, the French would have been very resistant, say in 2000, to this idea. Nicolas Sarkozy was the greatest champion of it. And so it was sort of, it brought it along. It sort of, sped up the process. Canada, and the difficulty Canada will have is if they're going to go and try and negotiate free trade agreements or whatever with India or countries like Japan or Brazil or what have you, the imbalance is going to make those negotiations so difficult. I mean, the United States was possible because there was a neighbor thing going on there. and Europe for the aforementioned reasons. But I just think that it's going to be very difficult for Canada to negotiate anything more than sort of basic sort of market access agreements with these other emerging powers of the world. This is a great power game, and Canada's not a great power. And largely, for even one simple reason, imagine we were to negotiate or try to negotiate an agreement with China or India. We wouldn't even have the capacity to enforce it. There's no way we could monitor anti-dumping. It would be almost impossible. That's the USTR, the European Union. I mean, they have the resources to a degree. We don't. We can't do those types of things.
So we have one last question here, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. I want to echo Danny's point about process, because I think that there's two different levels of the discussion going on here. One is about the details of the Canada-EU relationship itself, but the other one, in Canada anyway, the question of process is going to be very important, because I don't think we should underestimate the latent sense of resentment that exists in huge sections of the Canadian population towards previous free trade deals or trade deals. I think of the free trade deal with the United States, multilateral agreement on investment, NAFTA. They have all left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and the issue of process has been a big deal of all of this. And if this doesn't become a public and open process soon, there's going to be a political price to pay for that. So I think that's an important thing to bear in mind in the Canadian reality. In the Canadian reality, this will not just be done business to government. It won't fly.
But to a degree, it has been in the public realm. I can give you probably 50 articles that have been in the national press on this over the last year.
I've read those same articles.
We get this.
In the business section.
Okay. So what? The average public doesn't have responsibility to read all sections of the newspaper.
I've got two. That was a process question. The issue of I've got 2 points on context. The second one's a question. I really appreciate the presentations today. I've learned a lot, because I now understand the context. Because when I first saw Canada-EU, the imbalance seemed so great. Saying, why is the EU interested in us? I couldn't figure it out. But now I think I understand. It's the context is the collapse of the World Trade Organization or the paralysis. This isn't going well in Doha, and this is a second best. There's sort of a scramble ad hoc policy thing, a second best approach to opening up. I'm not using that to pass judgment on it. I'm just saying I think that's the context of what is happening. The second one is a question. This is occurring. What happens to these negotiations if the current economic context gets more difficult? Because there are pressures inside both North America and Europe towards protectionism and away from this type of opening up that might make it very difficult for this type of thing to move forward. I don't know. It's hard to speculate on those grounds, but I thought I'd throw that out.
Okay, one last round here. Sponsors? Steve?
Yeah, I mean, the process points are important, but I mean, they are linked, aren't they? Because you talked about opening up, and you talked about NAFTA. The content of an EU-Canada agreement is not going to be NAFTA. You have to be able to make the distinctions between them. For example, you talked about the MAI, the investment negotiations, but the EU position on those was very close to the position of a lot of opponents of the agreements. I mean, in other words, it's not NAFTA writ large, and I think it's probably important to make that point in the public debate. Not that it's not something I need to engage in. On the protectionist point. Yes, I mean, it's uncertain times, but it's quite interesting if you look really at what's happening. I mean, there have been articles about growing protectionism and how the G20 members have not stuck to the deal, but most of those measures were taken by India, China, not by the EU or US. I mean, the disciplines have been held quite well so far among the major OECD countries, which is partly a result of trade agreements.
I mean,
yeah.
that's why we are doing this now. I mean, you will also find when the summit is will be held on the 6th of May, that